The story of the Mitsubishi Galant VR4 is one of those stories in car history that is easy to miss, but once you know it, you will never forget it. It is like that quiet kid in class who suddenly wins the race on sports day, leaving everyone shocked. The Mitsubishi Galant VR4 first appeared in 1987, and at first glance, it just looked like another family sedan. But under the surface, it was hiding a rally-bred heart, built to meet the tough Group A rally rules of the time. These rules forced car companies to make at least 5,000 road-going versions of their race cars. So, Mitsubishi had no choice but to make this powerful sedan available for everyday drivers across markets like North America, Japan, Australia, and New Zealand. The first generation, also called the sixth generation of the Galant, used a 2.0-liter double overhead cam 16-valve inline-4 turbocharged engine. The engine was known as the 4G63T. It could make between 151 kilowatts to 177 kilowatts, which is about 205 to 241 horsepower at 6,000 revolutions per minute. The torque was around 294 to 304 newton meters at 3,500 revolutions per minute. Drivers could choose between a 5-speed manual transmission or a 4-speed automatic. The car measured 4,560 millimeters in length, 1,695 millimeters in width, and 1,440 millimeters in height, with a wheelbase of 2,600 millimeters. It weighed about 3,270 pounds. What made this car special was the Dynamic 4 system. It had full-time all-wheel drive, a center differential, 4-wheel steering, independent suspension at all corners, and even anti-lock brakes. It also had something called Dynamic Electronic Controlled Suspension, which basically meant the car could adjust its suspension on its own to make the ride more comfortable or more stable. In 1992, Mitsubishi brought out the 7th generation Galant VR4. By this time, Mitsubishi had already started focusing more on the Lancer evolution for rally competitions. The Galant VR4 shifted towards being a sporty road car. It still had all-wheel drive, but the engine changed. It now used a 2.0-liter double overhead cam 24-valve V6 twin turbocharged engine called the 6A12TT. It could be paired with a 5-speed manual or the Invex automatic transmission, which could adjust itself based on how you drove, kind of like when a teacher figures out your habits and adjusts the seating plan accordingly. It could go from 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in about 6.5 seconds and had a top speed of around 225 kilometers per hour. In 1996, Mitsubishi introduced the final version, the 8th generation Galant VR4. This time, it got serious with a 2.5-liter double overhead cam 24-valve V6 twin turbocharged engine called the 6A13TT. It produced 280 horsepower and 367 newton meters of torque. Buyers could pick between a 5-speed manual or the Invex 2 semi-automatic transmission, which even borrowed some ideas from Porsche's Tiptronic system. The sedan and wagon, which Mitsubishi called the Legnum, were both available. Some versions, like the Type S, came with something called active yaw control, which helped the car handle better by adjusting power to the rear wheels. The simpler Type V skipped this feature for those who wanted fewer surprises. The Galant VR4 was also active in the World Rally Championship from 1988 to 1992. It won 6 times. Mikael Eriksson and Klaus Billstam won in Finland in 1989. Pentti Arrekola and Ronan McNamee won in Great Britain the same year. Patrick Tauziak and Claude Papin grabbed victory in Côte d'Ivoire in 1990. Kenneth Eriksson and Staffan Parmander won in Sweden in 1991. Armin Schwartz and Klaus Wicha won in Australia that same year. Kenneth Eriksson and Staffan Parmander returned to win again in New Zealand in 1992. After that, Mitsubishi shifted most of its rally efforts to the smaller and more famous Lancer Evolution. Even though the Galant VR4 is not the most famous car in the world, it quietly became a piece of Mitsubishi's racing and technology history. It might look like a simple sedan, but as drivers back then found out, you should never judge a car just by its body panels. Sometimes, even the family sedan in the parking lot is ready to win a rally. The Jaguar XJR, also known as the X308, is one of those cars that quietly made history without shouting too much about it. Produced by Jaguar Cars between 1997 and 2003, the XJR, X308, was a luxury sports sedan that kept things simple but also powerful. Before this model, Jaguar was working with the older X300, which itself was based on the even older XJ40 platform first introduced back in 1986. So you could say the X308 was like the child who finally cleaned up after the messy older siblings. It carried forward some of the family genes, but with better manners and a sharper look. The biggest change was under the hood. Jaguar finally moved away from its old inline-6 and V12 engines and gave the XJR a brand new engine called the AJ-V8. This was Jaguar's first production V8, and it would go on to power many of their later cars. The XJR used the supercharged version of this engine, giving it serious power without making it look like a show-off. This engine had a displacement of 3,996 cubic centimeters, producing around 370 metric horsepower at 6,150 revolutions per minute and about 525 newton meters of torque at 3,600 revolutions per minute. The XJR could accelerate from 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in around 5.6 seconds, which, for a car that looked like it belonged in the parking lot of a fancy golf club, was surprisingly fast. The top speed was electronically limited to 250 kilometers per hour. On the outside, Jaguar did not try to reinvent the wheel. The XJR kept the classic XJ shape that people expected, like the 4 headlamps at the front and the smooth roofline. There were small updates, though. Jaguar gave it oval-shaped indicator lenses, rounded fog lamps, and a slightly different front grille. At the back, the tail lamps wrapped around the corners with red and clear lenses, different from the older X300, which had red and gray ones. It is like Jaguar wanted to say, yes, we updated it, but not too much, do not panic. Inside, the XJR was focused on making drivers feel comfortable. The dashboard had 3 deeply set gauges inside a walnut veneer instead of the rectangular cluster from older models. This design was similar to what Jaguar used in the XK8, another car from the same time. The door panels and center console were also updated to be more practical and stylish, but nothing too flashy. Underneath, the XJR used a double wishbone suspension both in the front and rear. It also had ventilated disc brakes on all 4 wheels, and an optional system called Computer Active Technology Suspension, which adjusted the dampers depending on how you were driving. This made the ride softer when you were just cruising, but firmer if you decided to drive like you were late for afternoon tea. The dimensions were what you would expect from a big sedan. The length was 5,023 millimeters, the width was 1,798 millimeters, and the height was 1,345 millimeters. The wheelbase measured 2,870 millimeters. The curb weight was about 4,068 pounds, making it no featherweight but still nimble enough. Fuel economy was not its strongest skill. In the city, it would burn around 18.0 liters per 100 kilometers. On the highway, it could manage about 9.5 liters per 100 kilometers, and combined, it averaged around 12.6 liters per 100 kilometers. Carbon dioxide emissions were about 313 grams per kilometer. The fuel tank could hold up to 81 liters, so at least you did not have to stop at every gas station, just every other one. In 2001, Jaguar made a special version called the XJR 100 to celebrate the 100th birthday of Sir William Lyons, the founder of Jaguar. Only 500 of these were built. They came with 19-inch BBS alloy wheels, bigger Brembo brakes, and some unique interior touches. It was Jaguar's way of saying happy birthday without baking a cake. The Jaguar XJR X308 might not be as famous as some other cars, but it played an important role. It was the bridge between Jaguar's older style and the modern cars that came after. It showed that Jaguar could still make a fast, comfortable, and elegant sedan without making it too flashy or too boring. It just quietly got the job done, like that one uncle who fixes everything at family gatherings but never brags about it. The Ford Mondeo ST220 is a car that often flies under the radar, but when you dig into its story, you will see it had plenty going on. Back in 2002, Ford decided it was time to give the Mondeo a proper performance version again. The older Ford Mondeo ST200 was already showing its age, so the company brought out something sharper and faster. They called it the Ford Mondeo ST220. It was part of the third generation of the Mondeo series, which car enthusiasts often refer to as the Mark III Mondeo. The ST220 was not just one car either. Ford made it in three versions: the saloon, the liftback, and the estate. Yes, even the family-friendly estate got the sporty treatment, which might have caused a few raised eyebrows back in the day. The heart of the Ford Mondeo ST220 was a newly developed engine called the Duratec V6. This was a 3.0-liter naturally aspirated engine that produced 226 horsepower at 6,150 revolutions per minute and 280 newton-meters of torque at 4,900 revolutions per minute. In simpler words, it had enough power to make your morning commute a little more exciting, without making you feel like you were behind the wheel of a race car that escaped from a track. The car could accelerate from 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in around 6.6 seconds, which was quick enough to surprise a few drivers at the traffic lights. Its top speed was about 249 kilometers per hour, which, for a family sedan, liftback, or estate, was not something you would see every day. Ford also gave the Mondeo ST220 a 6-speed manual transmission. This gave drivers more control and kept the driving experience engaging. The chassis was sport-tuned and lowered by 15 millimeters to make sure the car handled better in corners. The suspension was specially adjusted to handle the extra power. Ford did not stop there. They also upgraded the braking system with larger ventilated disc brakes on both the front and rear wheels. This made sure the car could stop properly, which is always a good thing, especially when you're going fast. On the outside, the ST220 looked slightly more aggressive, but not too flashy. It came with a unique front grille, new bumpers, side skirts, and 18-inch alloy wheels. People who knew cars would notice it was different, but it would not make you look like you were trying too hard. Inside, Ford fitted the ST220 with Recaro leather seats, a leather-wrapped steering wheel, and aluminum trim pieces. The cabin felt comfortable and had a sporty touch, but it still looked like a normal Mondeo to someone who was not paying much attention. The dimensions of the Ford Mondeo ST220 were also quite practical. It measured 4,731 millimeters in length, 1,812 millimeters wide without counting the mirrors, and about 1,429 millimeters tall for the saloon and liftback models. The estate was a bit taller at 1,441 millimeters. It had a wheelbase of 2,754 millimeters and weighed around 3,320 pounds. The fuel economy was, let's just say, not its strongest feature. It consumed about 14.3 liters per 100 kilometers in the city, 7.9 liters on highways, and around 10.2 liters combined. Today, many car fans still like the Ford Mondeo ST220 because it mixes performance with everyday practicality. It is not a supercar, but it is also not boring. The Mondeo ST220 is the kind of car that might pass by you on the road without making much noise, but if you take a closer look, you will realize it is more fun than it first seems.